Assalamu alaikum. You're watching Views and News, and I'm Faisal Rehman from our Islamabad studios. Today, we'll be talking about this very important agreement in Vienna nuclear talks that is pretty close, according to the Iranian authorities. They believe that they will be able to restore the 2005 nuclear deal that was done about almost 7 years ago when Jawad Zarif Saab was the foreign minister of Iran, and everybody really hailed him and thought that this man is the man of that particular year, because since he was able to convince the P5+1 countries and everything was sorted out. That was the time when Barack Obama was the president of United States of America. But later on, as Mr. Trump resumed his period, interestingly, he just backed out. Not only backed out, he took a complete U-turn, and the sanctions were again imposed on Iran. Now, the most interesting aspect is that it has resumed once more. Things are pretty much in control, and it is almost, I would say, completed. Now, we just need to hear that. This was stated on Sunday, by the way. But before I introduce you to our panelists for our today's program, our production team has prepared a report. Let's watch it.
Relations between Iran and the United States are on a tricky edge as the talks regarding revitalizing the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action have reached at an impasse. Iran's state-run Islamic Republic news agency reported recently that Iran has sent its latest proposals to the United States negotiators via European mediators in order to end this impasse, and Iran is hopeful regarding reaching an agreement with the United States over restoring the 2015 nuclear accord. Iran's Foreign Minister Hossein Amir-Abdollahian said that Tehran is waiting for a response to sent proposals. Meanwhile, the United States said, due to Iran's demand of reversal of Trump-era's decision which designated the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps a foreign terrorist organization, it is not confident that either the deal will be revived soon or not. Whereas Amir Abdollahian, while talking to the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, said that the ball is in the court of United States. The United States recently imposed sanctions on several entities involved in obtaining supplies for Iran's ballistic missile program, including Iran-based procurement agent Mohammad Ali Hosseini. He was accused by the United States on procuring ballistic missile propellant-related materials to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. These sanctions have soured the already strained relations between the two countries, as Iran's foreign ministry spokesman Saeed reacted to these sanctions while saying that the United States is still continuing its already failed policy of maximum pressure against Iran.
Welcome back in the studios. Now we have with us on my right is Air Commodore retired Basit Raza Abbasi Saab, who's a senior analyst. Thank you very much for your time. And we also have with us Ali Sarwar Naqvi Saab, former ambassador, senior diplomat. Thank you very much, sir, for your time as well. And we have with us from Germany, Harley Schlanger. He's a political analyst. Pleasure to have you, sir, in the show. Thank you very much for your time as well. And now, sir, let's start off from you, sir, talking about the current situation, though it has lingered on for a very long time, sir. The regime change, and on top, the moment Mr. Barack Obama left the presidency, there came Mr. Donald Trump. Many changes on many fronts, whether you talk about NAFTA, or you talk about NATO, or you talk about Mexico issue, or you talk about US-China trade, Middle Eastern politics, I mean, you name it, and this man was after it. But interestingly, sir, the most important was about the cancellation of the JCPOA. Now, sir, we have also learned that the current foreign minister, Mr. Hossein Amir-Abdollahian, he says that they are very close again regarding this particular deal, and most likely very soon the world is going to hear the good news. Let's start off from there, sir. What exactly has been going on, and how come eventually Mr. Biden is convinced?
Actually, Mr. Trump was a very different prime minister from the hierarchy of the presidents that we have had. He was very different. He was a man of his own views. So this JCPOA was cobbled after a prolonged, protracted negotiations, and it was termed as a great success of American diplomacy. But Mr. Trump saw it differently, because he saw in it that although the nuclear program was frozen, it was not scrapped. So Iran retained all the nuclear capability. The only thing that they were asked to freeze it and not to proceed any further. So anytime they wanted, they could switch it on. So that was a limitation of that program. Secondly, the missile program was not addressed in it. And so, despite
This missile
signing the-
program was separately treated.
Actually, missile is a very important component of any strategic weapon delivery system, because that is the ultimate weapon to deliver the nuclear weapons. So, although the Iranians froze their wherever they were, in fact, they were the enrichment was they were actually stopped. They were just saying 3 or 4% they were allowed, which is for normal medicinal uses or things
Agriculture
like that.
use or
Exactly.
otherwise, yes.
So otherwise they were enrichment was totally stopped, and all their nuclear assets were actually frozen wherever they were. And the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency representatives were there to monitor that and ensure, and they had to submit a periodic report that Iran is complying to the sanctions, all these terms and conditions, restrictions. And Iran did comply. And all the reports of IAEA were leading to that Iran is complying. Despite that, Mr. Trump decided to walk out, and I highlighted 2 main reasons for that. And after that,
Because a lot of people believe that Gerard Kushner, his son-in-law, really played a very dirty role, I would say, in cancelling this particular deal. And because he himself was a Jew, and on top, he had close ties with Benjamin Netanyahu. And I remember even prior to the signature of the former president, Barack Obama, I remember Mr. Netanyahu went to United States of America, Naqvi Saab, and the way he addressed the members of the Senate there, mostly they were not from the government. I mean, it seemed as if he is the man in charge even in the United States of America. And that was something which wasn't acceptable, or rather, nobody thought this is going to happen. People looked upon Barack Obama as a very weak president during that particular time period.
that's true. But once the deal was signed, actually Israel never liked it. Israel wanted to actually blast Iran and sort of destroy their nuclear facilities like they did in Iraq. And they wanted to do it on the back of the Americans. But since Barack Obama decided to go for this deal, so I do not know whether Jared Kushner did he play a part in it or not. I am not aware of that. But these are the main reasons for which sort of Trump talked about it, and he walked about it. But then when Mr. Biden came in, he came on an anti-Trump rhetoric, because his main was that he has taken a U-turn on most of the American policies, like American relationship with NATO was one, and this JCPOA was another, and so many other things. So he tried to restore the North Atlantic Treaty, NATO, and try to heal the wounds which were sort of created by Mr. Trump, because he said that the NATO countries are just having a free ride. We are providing for all the defense and they are progressing on the economic front, and look at their wealth, and we are becoming poorer, and just because we have taken the charge of all the security for them. So all this is the background. But what is happening now is that since he came, he tried to get back into it. And the European countries, they were all out for it, including Russia and Germany. They were all out for this deal to sort of work out. And before this assault, this Ukrainian issue, they were close. In fact, all the reports were they were very close to the signing of the agreement. And now the glitch came that because of sanctions on Russia, Russia is a part of this, he's a signatory of this deal also.
Correct.
So the Russians said that if you are sort of putting sanctions on us, then we will not be part of this deal. So this time the Russians actually were backing out. But then I think about 2 weeks back, that thing was sorted out, and the Russians were, as Mr. Lavrov said in a press conference, that they have been assured that the sanctions will not affect their trade with Iran.
And it is going to
So
be in
this is
accordance
the
with
letter.
what was signed in 2015, Naqvi Saab.
Exactly.
Is it correct?
Yes.
Now, also tell us, sir, because
2016.
we've also learned that the Iranian and the US delegations, they're not talking directly.
Yes.
Why is that so?
Well, because for one, they don't have diplomatic relations. There is no American ambassador in Tehran.
Yeah.
And in Washington, the Pakistan embassy represents the Iranian interest section. So I was the one who initiated this.
Okay,
I was
great.
the one who did the deal when we set up the Iran interest section in
And
our
which year was it,
embassy.
sir?
This was in 98.
98.
Yeah. Now, at that time, you see, the diplomatic bag of the Iranian embassy would come to our embassy, we would stamp it, and then it would be put on the plane, because the Iranian authority was not accepted by the US customs.
I still remember in the early 90s, the Iranians used to come to Islamabad to get the visas.
Yes.
For USA.
Yes. So exactly. So you see, we have been involved with this, and basically the two delegations don't talk to each other because they don't recognize each other officially or diplomatically. Anyway, that be whatever it is, coming to your question, you see, I have been closely associated with this from the very beginning, because I was Pakistan's ambassador to the IAEA in 2003, when this whole thing came up before the Board of Governors of the IAEA. And the Iranians, I think, have been extremely astute, extremely competent in dealing with this matter in their negotiations. Because first, the IAEA tried to discuss this with them, but they did not make much headway. So then the global P5+1, which means Germany, in addition to the P5, they started holding negotiations. And do you realize that from 2003 to 2015, for 12 years, the negotiations went on. Now, the agreement JCPOA is the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action for the Iranian nuclear deal. Now, that is a technical deal or a technical agreement about Iranian nuclear program. And that does, as my colleague said about the freezing of the nuclear program, actually the limit was laid down, but it was not completely eliminated.
Regarding the enrichment of the...
regarding the enrichment of uranium. Now, you see, under the IAEA statute, no country can be prevented or prohibited from developing a peaceful nuclear program. And that is what Iran says, that their nuclear program is peaceful. So you see, there is, they can develop nuclear program for power generation, for agriculture, for medicine, and all these related subjects, which are all peaceful uses. So the Iranians agreed to stop their enrichment at a certain point, which is about, under 10%. Now, the Trump, to cut it short, the Trump objection was that they have not included two particular problems that the West has with Iran. One is the ballistic missiles, development of ballistic missiles, and the second is support to terrorist groups in the Middle East. Now, the present situation is held up because of that, because the Americans want restrictions to be placed on the Pasdaran, the revolutionary guards of the Iranian regime. So that the Iranians say that this has nothing to do, which is true, it has nothing to do with the nuclear program. How can you impose conditions upon us? So that...
But they're still regarded as a terrorist organization?
Yes. So they are now reaching a point where this issue will be camouflaged in a kind of language which could be acceptable to both.
Correct.
So no clear-cut ruling about it. And then the second is ballistic missiles. Iran says that it doesn't want to develop ballistic missiles for weapons purposes. Now, the deal is close to being agreed upon, but there are still some caveats which might further delay it a little bit. But according to my information...
Sir, what about the issue of prisoner swapping? Has that been sorted out?
Yes, that is related to it, but it's not part of the main negotiations. That is a goodwill...
This could be a goodwill gesture from the Iranian side?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the whole deal looks like it will be revived, and the important thing is that the Iranians are very anxious to get the sanctions removed, because that is a whole, their money is being held up by them.
$200 billion.
$200 billion. And just sitting there, the American banks are earning interest on it.
Exactly.
And the Iranians are getting nothing out of it. So I think it's going to be decided soon because both sides have certain compelling reasons to.
But you
agree.
believe that it's a very positive development.
Yes.
So does Basit Saab.
Yes.
So let's see, sir, what our friend in Germany, Mr. Harley Schlanger, who's a political analyst, has to say about it. Welcome to the show, sir. And obviously, you must have been hearing what was being talked in the studio. Now, I want your opinion on this particular development. Iranians do believe that the agreement in Vienna nuclear talks is very close. And if so, I think that is a good development, not only for the region, but for the Iranian people in particular as well. So, your take.
Well, thank you for the invitation to be with you today. I'll tell you, I think the biggest problem, which is still not resolved, is American and British unilateralism. This agreement never should have been vacated. The conditions that are there, including the continuation of sanctions, should be considered a war crime. The US policy toward the world is that if countries don't submit to the so-called rules-based order, they will be punished. The $200 billion being held is theft, just as $300 billion from Russia is being held, $9 billion from Afghanistan is being held, billions from Venezuela are being held in US banks. These are crimes, and the problem is that the Germans and the French have not been forceful enough, and the Europeans in general, in opposing the US unilateralism. We see the same thing with Ukraine. So I'm glad to hear the Iranians believe that we're moving close to an agreement. That would be excellent for the whole world, because to lift the sanctions would mean Iran could play a bigger role in alleviating the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. It would also mean that the other part of this is that something has to be done about the Israeli insistence on attacking Iran. But my view is that there's no reason the agreement should have been violated or abandoned in the first place, except for this problem of American unilateralism. And while some people say it's Trump who did it, look, Biden has continued it. So something's going to have to change from the US, and the only thing that will change it, in my opinion, is increasing pressure from the rest of the world against US unilateralism, but especially from Europe.
But Mr. Harley, look at the condition in Europe at the moment. I mean, Russians invaded Ukraine, and whatever is going on, it's not good. It's about human tragedy. It's about so much more. And obviously, because of the pressure on the Iranians from the Americans, we do understand the issues and everything. But unfortunately, this is not the only case where the American unilateralism, as you earlier mentioned, played a very bad and negative role, sir. There are so many other occasions. I mean, invading a country and then saying, oh, there was this intelligence which wasn't correct or accurate. And then Mr. Tony Blair, of the former Prime Minister of UK, ends up saying sorry. Well, is sorry the option after killing millions and millions and destroying the entire countries? What I'm saying is that don't you think this has to be done on rational basis?
Well,
there has to be a proper ground, proper debate, and then issues should be taken into account and sorted out later.
Well, of course it should, but the problem is that the US and the British still insist on unilateralism. You mentioned Ukraine. The Russians, Putin made a commitment that only rubles could be accepted from unfriendly countries for oil and gas.
Correct.
The US and the British refused that and put pressure on Germany, France, Italy, and other countries to go along with it. Now, what's that going to mean for Germany? The heads of two of the largest industries in Germany, BASF and Siemens, said that German small and medium enterprises will be shut down by the cutoff of oil and gas from Russia. So who benefits from that? Now, secondly, the Ukraine situation has been made worse by the insistence of the United States and the British on pouring arms into the hands of the Ukrainian government to continue the war when there's an opportunity for negotiation.
Absolutely.
Instead, they're encouraging Zelensky to continue the fighting. So again, you look around the world, look at the U.S. pressure on India to not trade.
Yeah, the
with
Assistant Secretary of State, Donald Liu, is in India, and I'm sure one of the major agenda must be about the oil purchase in rubles and rupees.
Exactly, and also the pressure on Imran Khan in Pakistan coming from the United States. So what gives the United States the authority to tell countries what they can do and not do, and if they don't listen to the U.S., they get invaded and attacked, as you mentioned, Iraq, Libya, the overthrow of the Ukraine government in February 2014. All of these are cases of regime change directed by U.S. and NATO countries. So there's not going to be peace in the world, because here's what I see with Iran. I think Iran has been patient, has been trying to get an agreement. I think the Europeans want an agreement, but I think the U.S. will continue to find excuses to continue the sanctions, which the Iranians say is a red line. The sanctions must be removed, and I don't see any direction in the U.S. toward doing that.
Basit Saab, committing on a certain deal, saying that everything is good, we'll move on like that, and a country plans things. Because I was shocked to know that forget about the money of the government, the money of the people of the Islamic State of Iran. You talk about the trade of the precious metals, you talk about the energy, and that includes gas and oil and so much more. And then I believe that nothing has been done, only smuggling is taking place, or barter trade was another phenomena that we heard about. Do you think, sir, if this deal is done, everything is pretty much clear that, okay, fine, now this is what is in our interest and this is what in theirs. So what sort of an economic development do you see in, like, for example, replacement of old machinery regarding the extraction of oil, trade of gems and jewelry and precious metals, as we earlier talked about. Then on top, sir, Iran has been a country which has been under sanctions for a very long time. So that's a thirsty country that wants everything from. So you're talking about a lot of trade, sir. Do you see that happening in the future, sir? Or you believe that the Israeli pressure, which really matters in the Middle East, whether we believe it, like it or don't, that's a reality, is again going to, because there's a new prime minister this time, sir?
I see a very strange dynamics taking place. While America is trying to sort of converge to Iran, it's very strange to me. And under the present circumstances, that is, I would say, that has gained momentum, because the oil and gas which the Russians were supplying, and the Americans are trying to sort of prevent that, because they think that all this money is actually being is financing the Russian war efforts. So they want to block it, but they can't, because Europe is heavily dependent, and so are so many other countries.
Americans believe that
That's right.
They'll be able to sort that issue out
So
by supplying more
exactly
to their own, I would say, the kind of collection, I would say, they have,
Exactly.
and their own natural resources.
Exactly.
So what you're saying is that Iran, perhaps, this deal is not in the greater interest of Iran and the Iranian people. Perhaps it is because of the Russian factor.
Actually, it will be for the benefit of the Iranian
Qatar
people
has
also,
already agreed, by the way.
because the more oil, because at the moment Iran cannot sell its oil. It's against sanctions. So those sanctions will be removed. Plus, as you mentioned, that their oil industry is very antiquated. It's very old. It needs to be sort of upgraded.
Exactly.
And that would increase their production. So this will be a lot of sort of opportunities for the West to sell their machineries, their airlines. They need aeroplanes by hundreds, to sort of revive their airlines. And all these things are great business opportunities for the West. And the oil and gas dynamics is actually gaining a new importance these days. And the strangeness which I said was that America is distancing from the Arab bloc and nearing towards Iran. And Israel, the younger brother of USA, is inching towards the Arabs. As you have seen in the meeting we just held,
UAE,
where Tony Blinken was sitting there in Israel with the UAE Prime Minister and the other country, the Arab country, which are part of Abraham Accord. And you know, the blessings of some silent players are also in it. So this is a strange dynamics that Iran and Israel, they seem to be going into different camps. And in this world of blocks, I mean, unfortunately, we are going again back into the mindset of the Cold War. And again, the demand from the world powers for the countries to fall into blocks. And there are no neutral spaces left for them, like we have North Aligned movement or something like that, where people had a room, some countries had a room to stay in a block which neither belonged to behind the Russian or the American bloc. So the world is actually going back into those days. So under the circumstances, my personal belief is that this deal, if it happens to happen, it should happen now. And as my worthy colleague just pointed out,
now or never kind of a situation.
That's right. That's right. Because the situation is opportune. It's both ways. It's in the interest of the Americans because they are looking for candidates who can push in extra oil. They sort of have mended fence with Venezuela because they want Venezuela to produce more.
Imagine.
Oil. So now
Talking
Iran
to
is
Qatar.
another such pariah state which had been so called so much by them, but now they're inching towards it also. So this is the dynamics which is taking place, and who knows that Iran has a lot of gas resources, and Iran perhaps a pipeline could reach from Iran to Europe also one day, under the circumstances.
It's all
when
about
they want
getting connected. Yeah.
Exactly. So I would like to point out that I have read on the Revolutionary Guards. The Americans have not lifted this.
Will they do that?
They will not do it. But as the ambassador just pointed out, that it will perhaps be it will be sugar coated, but it will remain there. And perhaps Iranians have swallowed it because they also need, as you mentioned, that they're actually suffering very heavily because of these sanctions. And if these sanctions go, Iran will emerge as a very powerful and rich country.
Indeed, sir.
And they have their own ambitions beyond their borders. The war in Yemen and so many events in Syria and Lebanon,
Iraq,
are waiting for Iran's sort of assistance, if I may say, or whatever.
I mean, let's be very honest about, you know, whenever we talk about the proxy wars, it is generally believed that the Iranians have been, you know, really behind those, and especially General Soleimani, who was assassinated in that drone strike. So one thing which was I was just thinking about Naqvi Saab is that Mr. Biden is considered as a very weak president. I've been listening to Mr. Trump these days on and off, and he's been very vocal. Sir, what if there is an election after the given time period, and Sir, Mr. Trump returns once again?
In 24.
And let's suppose, because sir, this is the mid of 2022.
Yeah.
2024 isn't that far.
That's right. Yeah.
So, do you think there's going to be a U-turn or a reversal on this particular issue again, sir? There is a possibility.
There is. Yes. Actually, there are certain interests on both sides which argue in favor of some kind of deal to be revived, as was discussed just now, that the Iranians want the sanctions relief and the Americans want another source of oil to come into the market, and the Americans also want to, now the lines between Middle East and Iran and all those tensions are being sort of blurred and not remaining as fixed as they were. So the Americans would be better disposed to working out the deal. However, Israel still is pressing hard for the deal not to be revived. The Israelis want the Iranians to be pushed into a corner, and they want the Iranians to be sort of really acted against in a very harsh manner, so that, you know, the threat which they perceive. Now, Israel does perceive a threat from Iran because Iran has said that it wants to wipe out Israel. So, though whether it can do it or not is another matter.
Absolutely.
But they do see it as a dangerous partner in the...
Isn't it only limited to these statements, sir?
Well, no. I mean, they also claim that Iranians are the terrorist organizations in Lebanon.
Sir, if Iran raises voice against Israel whenever they bomb the poor Palestinians,
Yes.
so what's wrong with that?
What's wrong? Exactly.
Because if somebody is against your narrative, it doesn't mean that it's an enemy state.
There has to be a modicum of morality in international relations.
But it doesn't exist.
Like this gentleman from Germany who was talking about unilateralism, he is very right. But the Americans from the very beginning have been asserting their unilateralism. You know, the Monroe Doctrine. What is the Monroe Doctrine? They say that they will have a sphere of influence in the entire region. Why? Who are you? I mean, how can you have a sphere of influence over other countries? So the Americans do practice unilateralism, and the European countries have never opposed this thinking. They have not challenged this thinking, and therefore the Americans get away with it, because the Europeans have actually vital interests in reviving talks with the deal with Iran, and they have vital interest in doing business with Iran. You talked about, Mr. Basit was talking about their need for industry. Actually, all along the entire range of industries, like car.
Sir, Mr. Rouhani, when he was the president, I remember he visited Italy, and after that he went to France.
Yeah.
Right after this deal was done, sir, earlier. Yeah. And he was looking at purchasing around 500 jets to revive his airline industry, so that tourism, travel can take place and people should know what Iran is all about.
Yes. So, you know, their cars, they don't have spare parts.
Exactly.
They don't know how to run their railways. They don't
Air
know
Force,
how to,
their army,
their Air
their
Force,
Navy.
Exactly. All their armed forces.
Yes.
So, the Iranians badly need technology from the West.
All right. Sir, if you allow me, sir, Mr. Harley wants to add something here.
Yeah.
Please, Harley, Mr. Harley, go on.
Yes. I think one thing that's being missed in this discussion is that I believe the era of unilateralism is coming to an end. The Western economies are very badly hurt themselves by the sanctions. There are moves from Russia and China, backed by South Africa, Brazil, even Algeria, other countries that are saying that they're looking at a replacement of the petrodollar system, especially when the petrodollar system gives the power to the United States and the City of London to steal assets, to impose sanctions and everything else. So I think this potential is there for a new security and financial architecture. And my organization is holding a conference this Saturday to discuss with people from all over the world what is needed to break out of this geopolitical bloc strategy and instead look at the interests of humanity as a whole. What we've been discussing here about the needs for Iran, of upgrading machinery, of modernizing the economy, of course, that would be good for every partner. The French and the Germans in particular are looking at lifting of sanctions as an opportunity for increased trade. So is Russia. So are India and Pakistan with Iran. So it would make sense to break with this unilateralism. The problem is, as you mentioned, whether it's Trump or Biden, there are institutional forces in the United States which refuse to accept the idea that the post-Cold War order can be anything except an American century. But I think the rest of the world is moving away from this. We have an opportunity now, and my point, especially what I'm doing here as an American in Germany and in Europe in general, is to tell the Europeans, stop being a colony of the City of London and Wall Street. Assert your own authority on behalf of the interests of the whole world, as opposed to living under the pressure of the US and British banks.
Mr. Harley, you talked about the end of that era of unilateralism. I just want to add something. US envoy says Israel's hands not tied on Iran, even if nuke deal signed. And I'm talking about, and Blinken asked Bennett for Iran deal, and he asked about the alternative. And Israel can do and take whatever actions they need to take. Ambassador to Jerusalem asked tells rather Channel 12. I mean, what is this supposed to mean? How do you look at it?
I think Israel should not be allowed to blackmail the United States or other countries into backing its agenda. It's not an agenda that's good for Israel. You know, the tendency towards opening of trade with Arabs and Arab countries in Israel is meaningless if Israel is allowed to tell the United States which country should be attacked. Take the question of the Revolutionary Guards, for example. The activity of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards against the jihadists in Syria and Iraq was beneficial to the whole world. But the United States instead assassinated the leader of the Revolutionary Guards, another war crime, I would say. So we have to develop a sense of a security architecture under UN law, not under a rules-based order, which defends the sovereign rights of every nation. That has not been in effect for a while. And I think to give Israel a blank check that they can decide what will be done with Lebanon, with Syria, with Iran. I mean, the Israelis are still striking in Syria. So this is something that should be addressed, and it's going to require a new conference to establish, as Putin has called for, and as many other governments are now moving toward, a new security and financial architecture so that it's not all about the dollar and all about London and Wall Street.
Mr. Basit, quick comment, sir. Another statement, again, you know, when the United States of America says this, it really holds a lot of weightage. They say that Israel can do anything and everything to look after its own interest. It's a very broad statement. So perhaps they can, you know, do preemptive strikes on Iran if they think that, you know, something is going on. I mean, don't you think this is the time that, you know, world should come to an understanding that, listen, war is a problem. But obviously, you know, it's easier said than done. Do you think, sir, Israel and Iran, I mean, there could be some sort of an understanding at some stage, because now it seems that perhaps there is a high probability of talks between Saudi Arabia or GCC and Iran rather than Iran and Israel.
That's true. That's the world dynamics. And although we all believe that this American hegemony over the geopolitical events of the world should come to an end, but that's something which we all talk about it and desire to happen.
It's coming to an end.
But it's not likely. Unfortunately, let me say that we have talked of Ukraine. And before the Russians walked into Ukraine, the Europeans were actually diverging. They had a divergent view from the Americans.
100%?
The Germans, they never put any arms into, they strictly forbade their NATO countries in Europe.
They were practically forced by the Americans to be a part.
Yes, sir. And they were sort of having an independent policy. And Mr. Schultz, I think, went to Mr. Putin and was starting negotiation. Mr. Macron went to him and he was negotiating with him.
Even the former Chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel, spoke to him.
Exactly. Angela Merkel
And I
was
would
a very
say
strong player.
Mr. Putin is very fond of Angela Merkel.
She was a very strong player. I wish if she was here, things might have been different.
Perhaps.
But you know, unfortunately, after 24th February, all the Europeans who were dissenting from the United States actually fell behind. And Germany was the first country. They stopped the Nord Stream flow. The pipeline was complete. They just had to open the tap. And they say that we will not open the tap. So this is an unfortunate development.
That's what union is all about. European
Mr.
Union.
German colleague may like to comment on it. How he sees
American colleague living in Germany.
Germany, yes. How he sees
That's
this
a very
development.
interesting
And
combination.
isn't this an unfortunate development which has taken place due to the Russian entry into Ukraine?
All right. Sir, another very important question, and that is something which is really beneficial for Pakistan. Sir, Iran, Pakistan, forget about India at the moment. It was supposed to be IPI.
IPI.
But sir, is it any probability that this could be the future for these two countries? Because sir, we need it, and we need it now.
Yes. Actually, the big hope for Pakistan was when the deal was originally signed, and there was talk of lifting of sanctions and pulling back Iran into the international
And most of the infrastructure, it has been
into
completed.
the mainstream. So we would have benefited because then the gas pipeline project would have gotten off the ground. And the Iranians have, as you say, built their part.
Sir, you remember the former president, I was really fond of him when Mr. Jawad Zarif was in power.
Yes.
Ahmed, what was his name, sir?
Ahmadinejad.
Ahmadinejad. He in fact said, okay, we have done our job. Mr. Zardari was in Iran at that time along with his delegation, Pakistan People's Party's last couple of months. And Ahmadinejad offered them 250 million US dollars. Just imagine, so that we can complete the overall infrastructure on our side.
Yeah, I think in that Faisal, there are two things. One, I think we have been very lax. Americans are objecting, okay, fine, but if we had shown determination, we could have, it's an economic project. It doesn't have any political implications. So that's one.
No LNG scandals, nothing.
No, and then, well, that we should of course have ensured. But the other is that this is American pressure only goes, I have served in Washington for many years, it goes that far. Once the country shows some grit or some takes a stand, some spine, then the Americans also then they let it happen. Because with the Indians, for example, the Su-400 and many such instances, they have to accept.
They haven't raised even a single
yeah. So why don't we do it? It is in our national interest. And this idea was conceived in Pakistan in the 80s. There was some Air Force officer or army officer who originally conceived of the idea of a gas pipeline with Iran. And it has been
But sir, let's hope and pray that whatever happens should happen in the best interest of everybody.
Yes.
Whether it's Pakistan or Iran or whichever country we're talking about. But sir, as they say, that regions grow and then the individual countries also grow.
Yeah.
Because that is very important. When you talk about connectivity and the kind of promises made by the Chinese regarding the investment in Iran, I think $400 billion, that's a lot of money even over a period of 25 years.
Yeah.
Just do the basic math and you'll be shocked to see how much money is going to be pouring into Iran, especially when you talk about their infrastructure and otherwise. But anyway, I would like to say thank you so much, Basit Saab. Naqvi Saab, such a pleasure to have you. And I've seen you after a very long time, by the way, but keep coming. It's good to have you. And thank you very much, Mr. Harley, for your presence, sir. It is always great to have you on the show. Thank you very much once again. And that's all we have for this hour. I'll see you, inshallah, on rather tomorrow. I think this is Ramadan, which is really hitting hard right now. But I'll see you tomorrow, inshallah. Till then, you take good care. Khuda Hafiz.